Hello, Professor Michael. What do you want to talk about today?
Okay, thanks for the invitation. I'd like to talk about participatory mapping and participatory GIS, usually called PGIS, which I believe is very importantly complementary to standard mapping and standard GIS as we see in ITC.
Okay, well, I will have to start asking, what are those things?
What the simple answer is when people participate in it, and the fuller answer is it's mapping of local people's own knowledge. A lot of participatory mapping is dealing with special categories of people, indigenous people in particular. There's a lot of emphasis on that, but actually any local people, because it can be local people in the city of Enschede or local people in New York or anywhere. The basic idea is that ordinary people have a lot of spatial knowledge, which the experts, the professionals, the planners and things don't know. Moreover, they have factual knowledge. So you go to a location, a village in Africa, and ask where do they get the water from? Where do they get their firewood from? Where do they get their medicinal plants from? We can ask for questions, but actually we have no idea what the answer is. And often that answer cannot come from remote sensing. It has to come from people's own experience and people's accumulated knowledge, their generation, maybe generations before as well. That's often important. And the second aspect of his local knowledge is people's values and people's interests and people's hierarchies of interests. What are priorities for them? Of course we don't know that. And it might be in terms of risks and dangers, what to them is really significant. And again, I could make a quick example. A lot of participatory mapping recently has been what we call gendered mapping. So particularly mapping with women in urban areas, what are felt to be and what really are more insecure areas or just more unpleasant areas. You can do the same with children. And who else knows that except the people who actually experience it? So that's for participation.
Okay, so I would like to start from the practical side. Mm-hmm. How does it work? Is it that you put a map on a round table and everybody draw together? What is the technical part?
The traditional way to do it, and the traditional goes back to maybe 1970s. Well, actually, it probably goes back hundreds of years, but it started to become an academic subject in the 70s and 80s. It was exactly that. And what we practiced in ITC and many other places, a very standard approach is it used to be a satellite image or an aerial photo. Now it'll be a Google Earth image with plastic overlay on top of it. And then whatever the questions are, whatever the discussion is, people start marking on that. Very often, the second step, that's the first step. Well, the first steps, of course, are to meet people and talk about people. And absolutely important question is, why are we doing this? When we're working in this field, the absolute necessity is the P for purpose. Why on earth are we doing this? Why do people make an effort to come together and spend their time and not do something else when we do that? So what is the purpose of it? In a really participatory process, the purpose should primarily be coming from a local people, but always, of course, with outsiders who have some other ideas to add to it. That's okay, first step. The second step is what you said. Put down a map of some kind, but an image much, much better than a map. Maps are full of lies, of the river is not a little blue line going across the page, the road is not a black line going across the page, the scale doesn't make sense, even the location often doesn't make sense, the river moves around. You've got a forest demarcated there, you go and visit the forest, there ain't no forest anymore. So maps are not a good thing to start with. Google Earth image is probably the best thing to begin with. Of course, it has seasonalities and other problems like that. And the second step, very often, or normally, is to then go with the local people to visit these sites, so within walking distance, we hope, or within drone distance nowadays, to visit the sites and actually then geolocate them and GPS them. And I remember talking with somebody and they said, but you've already marked them on the image, so what's the purpose of then going out and walking around with your GPS? Because you know where the place is. And that's the good question, because the real reason for doing it is to double check and triple check and learn more things. Because when you walk around, even the local people say, oh, I forgot to tell you, something else. Of course, they don't need to use a GPS. That's just the excuse to go out and mark it. So that's normally the second step. The third step is lots of cross-checking. I think a very important thing about participatory mapping, a very important, let's call it a weakness of the participatory mapping, it's a small group of people. It has to be. People have to come and spend hours sitting with you and with each other and talking and discussing. And who has the time to do that? Many people, many rural areas where women don't have the time, but other people don't have the time. Or it's easily dominated by one or a few people who want to put over their story. So participation is deep, but it's not broad. So the third step, I think we got to, or fourth step, I'm not sure, fourth step, is to look at the representativity of the information which you're getting. And that is becoming easier and better nowadays with the use of social media and online apps and things. There's a lot of smartphones around the world now, or other ways of talking to more people to try to get other people in that community, in that group, to say they agree or don't agree, or what else do they think about it. And I think this is something which is growing in participatory mapping. Initially, traditional participatory mapping, we relied too much on the deep, interesting, rich knowledge we were getting from a few people. And now we realize that is deep knowledge, but it's not maybe representative. So to do that cross-checking. And the final step, which also is developing more, is then how to disseminate that, how to use that. And again, there's new social media, there's new apps to try to do that, to disseminate better. Yeah.
Okay. Well, one curiosity. I always thought that reading maps is something natural for the human being. Mm-hmm. I discovered it's not with my daughter. And I tried to ask her, do you know where our house is? It should be quite easy to identify on a map, but she couldn't. So I imagine that if you go to a village, that maybe the people there will look at a map and have no clue what's going on. Is that something you have to deal with?
That's a really nice question, because in fact I don't know the total absolute scientific answer to that, because you find both cases. I have a nice story from a colleague here at ITC. Many years ago, she was working in Madagascar, and they were going to work with some groups of local women with aerial photos. And they were going to give some training on how to look at and interpret the aerial photos. And she and her colleagues were in the other room having a cup of tea or something like that. And they heard lots of giggling and talking and chatting among people. They went into the other room. The women all had their aerial photos out and were saying, oh, there's my house. There's a road which goes to a market. Training, zero. They didn't need 12 months in ITC to learn how to do that. In Kenya, we had something similar like that. We went to work with some old men of an indigenous group who had not worked with aerial photos before. Number one, they realized one of the photos in the sequence was missing, which the NGO we're working with had forgotten to bring. And they said, no, there's a gap there. They started looking at it. And the other very interesting thing, and it's illustrative of a lot of what participatory mapping is about, we were using these plastic oversheets to mark on it. And they said, and we used, removable pens to do it, because they made a mistake and cleaned it off. And they said, no, don't do that, because we trust you, we work with you, but we want to make sure that what we mark will stay. We don't want you to take it back to, well, not to us, but to the NGO, and then maybe change things. So they insisted on using indelible marking so that it would be their knowledge would be protected.
Yeah. So very interesting. But we were speaking until now about putting a map on the table and drawing over a sheet of plastic.
Yeah.
But that's old school, right? How did it evolve, and where are we now?
Yes, but it's still valid, and in most participatory mapping, what PGIS adds to the mapping is all the value added of GIS, even traditional GIS. You can do analysis, you can do calculations, you can make boundaries. You can do all kinds of analysis of the size and quantity and the relative location and things like that, and you can store the knowledge, and then you can build layers on it. And another story about that, which is illustrative, a standard GIS will have, or of a piece of land, will have many layers. You'll have the soil and the vegetation and the water and the risks and the social things. And classic case from New Zealand with Maori. It's well developed with Maori natural resource management groups. They say of these layers of knowledge, some are public and some are secret. And you can do that with a GIS. I mean, of course, you can just say other people don't have access to that layer. And the layers which they were, particularly in this case, were sacred sites, were historic sites, for very practical reasons, because people will come out at weekend and rob them, looking for whatever, for something, and for cultural and religious sacred reasons. People shouldn't know this. This is part of our cosmovision, so they wanted to keep it quiet. The layers of important, valuable plant sources, especially medicinal plants. No, we don't want other people to know where these things are. With your GIS, you can do that. And with the old standard map, it would be much more difficult. You'd have to take one plastic sheet away and hide it and something. So GIS has added a lot to that. And the other thing, back to your question, is we, or people doing this, are using more and more social media of various kinds, including Facebook groups and stuff like that, plus smartphone apps to maybe at the beginning to get some first ideas in of what are the interesting places and problems to look at. Then you have the deep, intense work with real people sitting around a table and walk around. And then again, you go back to social media to do this or apps to do this cross-checking. And well, one thing we've used is a software developed in Kenya called Ushahidi, which can be adapted to this. It has been adapted in many places to do that. And there's more and more software developing with this, so that you can do cross-checking with
Can you give a good example of impact of a project that you did, for example, on participatory mapping?
That's a good question, because unfortunately in academia and in projects in general, follow-up is not the highest. Sadly, it really isn't a priority. The project is done, signed off, and then people move on. It's rare for someone to go back. There are some, and I can't say for myself that I've done a specific, say 5 years after, follow-up study to see what happened. There are actually, right at the moment, from Canada, there's funding for quite a big project to do that, to go back even 10 or 20 years later. But then you fall into a problem very common in social science and in policy science. How do you distinguish the impact of that activity from 1,000 other things which are going on at the same time? In our own case, well, I can give one example, an early study with a PhD student from here. We set up some mapping of a forest area in Cameroon, and he was teaching the people to do this PGIS and so on, and they used it to go to claim that forest area to the government. The government were going through a phase of finally giving property rights to local communities for their local forests. Before that, they'd been government forests. And one first issue was actually the maps produced, the geodata produced by the community was too high quality for the ministry to deal with, because they were used to dealing with just forestry department, just more scroll some lines around. So that was a particular issue that was solved, of course. But what we liked was, I don't know, a year or two later, this community was having a dispute with an oil palm plantation, which was expanding. And they were able to use these maps which they had made to have some kind of legal fight with it. I can't say that they were successful because of that. And obviously it wasn't the only information they were using, but it was useful for them to do that. So for us, I mean, I think the success is when the community, or maybe just individuals in it, are using the technique and or using the data to progress onto other things, probably things we haven't thought of, you know. So, but was it a success or not? Well, it was in one way, but it wasn't exactly what the project originally intended.
Do you want to be a GeoHero as well? Then take the first step and click the subscribe button and then the bell button to always be the first to know when one of our GeoHeroes posts a new video.